What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Quality Talks podcast. I'm your host, Stu Day, and we've got a great episode lined up for you today. To start us off, I want to ask you a question. So we're into 2026, pushing towards the end of January. I don't know where the time's going, if I'm honest, but January blues are almost out the way for us all. My question to you all is, in the tech industry right now, how are you feeling? Are you feeling behind, especially with all this AI and how quickly everything is moving? So don't worry if you are. There's a lot of people out there feeling the same way. And in today's episode, we're actually going to get into that a lot more and maybe bring something to your attention that you may not be aware of around other people that are feeling the exact same way. And joining me today on the show is Ash Gawthorp, CTO and co-founder of 1010. Hey Ash, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Stu. Thank you for inviting me along today.
It's great to have you on, and we're all branded up. Look at us. For those that can't see us, we've got our 1010 Scale Factory merch on, and I am still repping the Quality Talks cap, though, obviously. So Ash, for those that don't know you, obviously I do, and I've got to be on my best behaviour today because, work colleagues and all that. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure, yeah, I'm Ash. As you said, Stu, co-founder and CTO of 1010. My background is in hardware engineering originally, and then software engineering, architecture, performance engineering, and more recently working with 1010 and at 1010 on our academy. So that's around the program where we've brought hundreds of people into the organization without tech experience, so they don't feel left behind. They haven't even started. So there's an awful lot of imposter syndrome that we need to overcome to sort of get those guys up to speed. So we've got a little bit of an expertise in that area, and also a bit of a view on how we can help, and some suggestions in that area as well.
Nice. Yeah. And the academy is brilliant. It really is, seeing it, having been a customer of it in the past and now seeing it also firsthand internally. Yes. It's great. It's great to see it. And the talent that comes through there is superb. And it's great to see people switching from previous non-tech backgrounds to tech backgrounds through the academy as well, which is a really great benefit of it.
100%.
So let's get into this a little bit. So there was something that triggered this conversation that we had in the office the other week, which led us to us recording this podcast. And that was a tweet that went out in December, wasn't it, Ash? And that tweet was by Andrej Karpathy.
Yep.
So do you want to just sort of talk a little bit more about that tweet? Because it resonated with a lot of people. And for those that maybe for the listeners, maybe some people have seen it, maybe some people haven't seen it. But just, are you able to just expand on why that sort of triggered the reaction it has?
Yeah, sure. And in your initial intro there, you mentioned about lots of people feeling that they're struggling to keep up and that there's so much change and everything else going on. And I think many people were thinking that. Some were saying it. But, Andrej Karpathy, when you kind of look at what he's done, he's almost one of the godfathers of AI, if you like.
Yes.
One of the co-founders at OpenAI. He then sort of ran Tesla's autopilot program. So, if you have a Tesla and you're driving along the road and you take your hands off the wheel, the reason why you don't die in 15 seconds as you veer off the road is because, his work and the teams that he led there. And he put that tweet out on, I think it was Boxing Day, certainly around Christmas.
Yes, it was Boxing Day.
He's saying, I've never felt this far behind as a programmer. I've never felt this much pressure to kind of keep up and to think I should be using all this stuff that's coming out, and I should be 10 times quicker, and I should be leveraging all these tools that are out there in the market and changing all the time. And also a bit of a recognition that in his role in that software development discipline, so much of it is now being generated by these LLMs and far less of it actually generated by the engineers themselves. And that's him saying this,
Exactly.
The smartest and most accomplished of us is thinking this, what hope the rest of us to some extent.
Yeah, precisely. You'll see that for those watching, you'll see the tweet up on screen now, actually, so you can read it, but we'll also link it in the show notes so you can go and have a have a look. But it's resonated with so many people, in different roles at different levels, and I think it's just been an eye opener to everybody. And it's also led you to then write a bit of an article on it, isn't it, Ash? Because, and that's what we're trying to get into a bit today around sort of, you may feel behind, as a software tester, you may feel behind, but actually that may not be so much of the case.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So that sort of obviously resonated with you to then go ahead and look at that in a bit more detail, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're experiencing this enormous kind of seismic shift. I mean, I think in Andrej's tweet there, he talks about like what is it, sort of a level 9 earthquake or whatever, sort of
yes, it does.
That huge magnitude 9 earthquake. There we go. And I think that's 100% true. I think there are so many foundations that the world of sort of software and system development sort of exists on and sort of has as its bedrock that are just being completely shaken to the core by this. I think there's three things, and then I'll come back to the whole software testing part of that. So the first one is just the pace of change. Everything is moving so quickly; it's so insanely fast. New approaches every month, new models every week.
Yeah.
New tools every day.
Yeah.
How do you keep up with that? You can't. And I think the second thing is that there's been a fundamental shift in the workflows and how they kind of work. If you think about it, software development and writing software, we've done it the same way for 50 years in some ways. So you've had an individual sits down in front of a keyboard, in front of a screen, or VDU as they've been called. In the mid-60s.
I remember I remember a VDU. My first role was a VDU. Yeah,
100%. And so writing software is about taking the solution that you see in your head and typing that in and then getting that feedback and verification on the screen. In some ways, that's not changed for 50 years. If you write software today, you're still doing that. But actually, the caveat is it's not like that today. It was like that until 18 months ago. Whereas now you're now in this situation where humans, individuals, programmers are actually writing far less code themselves.
Yes.
That's a fundamental shift in how these things work. And Andrej talks about that. The bits contributed by the programmer are increasingly sparse and in between. Your developers aren't writing as much code anymore. The LLMs are, and a couple of concrete examples of this. Anthropic, recently announced that Claude Code, their sort of software development kind of co-pilot, and you can use it for things that aren't software as well. I think it's a bit of a misleading name. But they came out publicly saying 90 to 95% of Claude Code's code is written by Claude. And in actual fact, again, it was a very busy time between Christmas and New Year in terms of the tweets going out. I don't know, maybe these guys did a bit of a quiet Christmas. Boris Chani, so the guy who created Claude Code, who wrote that, he tweeted that in the last 30 days, 100% of the code that he had contributed towards Claude Code was code written by Claude. He had not handcrafted a single line of code. So the AI is literally building itself. Now, I guess in some ways you might think that's a bit scary. It's all a bit Skynet-esque.
Yeah.
But that's how it is. That's where we are, and that's not going to decrease in the future. And it's not just Anthropic. There's senior engineers throughout the world saying publicly, on Reddit, on Substack, on YouTube, saying, I don't write most of the code I commit anymore. And I think some of them are even saying, and I don't even know how the code I'm committing works.
That's the worrying thing.
That's the worrying thing. So I think they're having a bit of an existential crisis. If I'm not needed to write this code anymore, what's my purpose? So that's the two. And the third one, and this is the biggest one, and this is really where I think it ties in with testing. The fundamental nature of the software that people are creating itself has actually changed. If you think back to the point pre-18 months, a few years ago, you wrote code, and the one thing you could be sure of is that you tested that code, you deployed it into production, and if you did the same thing with exactly the same data over again, you would get exactly the same result out. That's gone now. That does not exist anymore. Part of what we're doing nowadays, particularly with agentic AI, is still that system and software engineering, but with LLMs at the core of what they're doing. So you've gone from having something which is deterministic, where you know exactly what it does, and the dev writing it knows how it works because they wrote it, to something, even if they have written the code themselves, where that LLM fundamentally is different. It's non-deterministic. It's probabilistic. You put the same data in, you'll get, the only thing you're sure of is that if you put the same data in, you're not going to get the same answer twice.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I think that's a huge bit of it. And I think the alien part that he talks about is that these things are big now. You know, GPT-5, I think they're talking about 3.2 trillion parameters in there. And that's like
It's
a
insane.
massive black box. In fact, it's not a black box, it's a black hole. Yeah, it's so massive. You know, 3.2 trillion parameters. You can't inspect them, you can't read them. It works it out itself as part of its training cycle. And you sure as hell can't look at an answer coming out of it and say, well, let's put the debugger on that. Let's actually put a breakpoint on that, run through and see where it broke and see why it came up with that answer. You know, that's gone. That's gone. You're not debugging that program anymore. You're observing it. Observing what is a fundamental, unpredictable system that, to his point, may as well be alien technology that we're using.
Yeah.
It's a shift. It's a huge shift.
It is, and you know, I just wanted to pick up on your point about repeatability and now the lack of it. With repeatability comes confidence, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, as we've built software over the years, part of what we do is to make sure that you gain confidence through the repeatability of the outputs that you're getting and the outcomes that you're seeing and expecting. So I expect to get X and I get X. Great, yay, we're happy, we're confident. That's out the window now, right? It like you say,
Absolutely.
and so we need to think about, you know, how do we then build more, you know, build confidence and stuff like that. And I saw in one of the comments actually, I mean, there's a lot of comments. There's like 2,500 comments on this tweet. To put it into perspective, people, if you haven't looked at it, 16.5 million views, 55,000 likes, 10,000 retweets, and 2,500 comments, right? And 32,000
that's
people
almost.
have just bookmarked it. So yeah,
I mean that's almost as many as you get, Stu.
do you know what? Yeah, I mean, it's not quite, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
Yeah.
But I saw in one of the comments that Karpathy, someone called Karpathy a gaslighting victim, and sort of highlighting the disconnect between AI marketing hype and what did it say, and engineering reality.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on that? Do you think that's pushing it a little bit far, or you know?
It's maybe pushing it a bit far, but I'm sure it was put there for, you know, to get people to engage with it. But 100% get the point. You know, you've got this sort of juxtaposition where you've got the AI vendors, all the hype saying, you know what, this latest model, it's at PhD level. You know, it can pass the bar exam. It does better than American lawyers when they sit the exams. And that's all creating these unrealistic expectations about capabilities. You know, and I think the reality is that the models are powerful, but they are at their core unreliable and unpredictable. That's not going to change. That's just the world we're in. And we need to get used to that and engineer the things back in, you're engineering trust back into this. You need to put a structure in place that will keep it on the straight and narrow, frankly. And I think the other thing that we see is that the model's performance, you see all these benchmarks in terms of, oh, this performs better at this than this model and all the rest of it. The benchmarks are great, but the problem with the benchmark is that if that's what the models are measured against,
Yes,
implicitly or explicitly, it's going to get gamed. People are going to target those, you know, people are going to target those metrics and target those benchmarks in order to do as well as possible. And what people are seeing is that they do well in those benchmarks, but then when you apply it to a more general case, the performance is nowhere near as good, and in some cases is kind of detrimental. So all that sort of turns into this part of, you know, engineers are kind of caught between this hype of, oh my God, this thing should be able to do anything, and the messy truth of the implementation, which is, oh my God, what I've built is actually really quite stupid in some cases, and it's making fundamental errors. And I think the gaslighting bit is, with all the hype, people thinking, you know, is this me? Am I taking this super intelligent thing and actually making it stupid through my lack of understanding or something else? You know, to which the answer is no. That's just the fundamentals of how they work, and to stop them doing that and to actually make them useful, you have to do an awful lot of work working with that uncertainty and within putting the constraints back in again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you say, I think that's the realization. It's like it's people are questioning themselves almost, like that. You know, you've got experienced people that have been working and doing these jobs for many, 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 many years, had now got imposter syndrome. You know, and they are questioning themselves, right? Yeah, and I just want to pick up because in the tweets, Karpathy talks about this new programmable layer. And you pick up on this in the article that you've written, and I just want to delve into it a little bit more, because you're actually describing it as that's what software testing, we've been doing that in software testing for years, right? And yeah, I'm just interested to delve into that a little bit more if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. That point around managing, I can't remember the words, sort of like stochastic, fallible, unintelligible entities.
Yes.
It's cat herding, yeah. And in the testing world, everybody's been used to testing these black box systems that they didn't write and they don't understand how they work, dealing with unpredictable root users, working in unstable environments, but somehow guaranteeing that quality anyway and making sure that the thing's verifiable and that it works. That's completely new and alien to your average developer. Where everything that they've created, they know about, they built it, they know exactly how it works. So the testing community is comfortable being uncomfortable. I think it's had to be, and I think it's just had to work within those constraints. And I think in some ways, the idea that developers kind of work in these lovely sort of well-lit clean rooms, defining these kind of happy paths historically. Whereas testers, I guess, have always lived in kind of, don't want to get dramatic here, but always lived in the half-light.
I think there's
never quite been able to see properly.
Yeah, and I think we've always we come at things with a little bit of a level of skepticism, and what's
100%
glass half empty, that kind of approach, because we've always had to, right? Because we're there to try and find where issues may lie, So I think that's just a natural thing, natural behaviour, and a natural mindset.
That adversarial mindset is exactly what you need.
Yes, absolutely.
And there's nobody more optimistic than a developer. I'm going to do this in this amount of time and it'll be great. And rightly so, there's a good bit of healthy pessimism in the mind of your average tester.
Yes.
But that's intrinsic. That's essential, because that's exactly what software is nowadays. If it's using LLMs, it is optimistic. It will make things up. It will hallucinate. So you need somebody there with a heavy dollop of skepticism, sort of taking a look at it, and a grown-up, frankly, sort of keeping an eye on it and making sure that it's kind of performing in the way that it should do. We're in a world now, I guess, where everything's an edge case to some extent, and that sort of tester's skill set and mindset is central to it.
It is, and you've broken this down into sort of 4 key areas, haven't you, in terms of your thinking around this? And can we just dive into those a little bit, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So the first one of those layers is really around sort of specification with prompting or through prompting. So many people think of prompt engineering. Oh, that's great. That's a brand new thing. 90% of people, they think the prompt is just a question. So hey, ChatGPT, write me a poem about a sad robot or something. But in the real world, that prompt is actually a set of very carefully worded constraints that you apply on this massively probability sort of distribution machine to sort of keep it in line and keep it doing what you want it to do, nudging it along the way to get a reliable, repeatable outcome, trying to shoehorn in some determinism back into this non-deterministic thing. You're not asking a question, you're narrowing that search space for an answer. And maybe another way to think about it, what do you think is the number one enemy of large language models? I think they fall apart. What do you think the problem is for them?
No. What is it, Ash?
Well, in my mind, ambiguity. If you leave room for interpretation in terms of what you're doing, it will fill that gap. It will fill it with the most statistically probable noise that it thinks it should put in there. Great. The danger, it will sound plausible. It will sound incredibly plausible. But chances are it will be hallucinating. It will be making stuff up. So prompt engineering is really just sort of intent specification.
Yeah,
eliminating that ambiguity from your requirements as much as you can.
Do you know what? When we talk more about prompt engineering and sort of what you were saying there about ambiguity and hallucinating and all that kind of stuff, we know that that's a challenge, right? But we know that that's where you're not getting repeatable outputs all the time. I liken it to when you talk to your children and you ask your children to do something, and they'll interpret that in a certain way and they'll go and do what they think. So if I ask my daughter, could you please go and pick all your toys up off the floor? Yeah, she'll go and she'll pick the toys up off the floor and she'll put them on her bed. Right? But what I really need to say is, please, can you go and pick the toys up off the floor, put them away in your toy box, whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's kind of, I just keep like coming back to that sort of like, maybe we just need to be thinking about the AI as a child and really having to that then lead us how to prompt correctly with the right level of
100%.
like information and description, and and then move forward from there. So let's not think of it as
right.
the most intelligent being in the planet that's going to know what I mean. Let's think of it as a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, or
Think of it as a 5-year-old with the ability to be PhD level in some very, very specific things, which is nothing to do with tidying a room. 100%. I mean, the way I tend to think about it is I think to myself, imagine it's a junior employee. It's a junior employee. They're smart. They're keen as mustard, but they will do things wrong, or they will interpret things incorrectly because they don't have the experience. And you wouldn't take that junior employee and just sit them down in front of your customers and just give them free rein to talk about what they want, or to create a document and then just fire it out the door without somebody checking first.
Exactly.
If you think about that and having those constraints around it, I think what's interesting in that, bringing it back to testing, is that if you're good at writing sort of rigorous, unambiguous test plans that cover all the ways that the weird and wonderful ways that a user might break something, you're naturally, to your point, having those skills to be a decent prompt engineer. You know how to think adversarially. You know how to close the loopholes and think of those loopholes naturally that the AI would slip through.
Yeah, and it comes back to, I'm a massive believer in our ability to storytell. So what is the message we're trying to convey, and how do we shape that so that people of different audiences, and the AI is one of them, will understand, right? And we have different ways that we can do that. And I think, if we've got that skill in our toolkit, right? That tool in our toolkit already. It's just adapting it to now be something that we use for prompt engineering.
Reframing it, renaming it, and making it sort of work in this new world where, to your point, people having that expertise sets them ahead of people in a great deal of technical roles. And the second point is, the second part is the verification part. So this really is the testing function in a nutshell, essentially. We're in that world where you've got AI generating code, that's a separate thing, but you've also got, even if it doesn't, you've got an LLM in there that is making decisions at runtime, producing these plausible falsehoods. You need explicit verification. There's no longer somebody authoring every line of that. They're now the orchestrator of those tools. You need somebody who's the auditor, the validator, the ones who ultimately decide what's acceptable. And that's not just at the point of release either. That's when it's running. That needs to be done on the fly all the time. So robust testing frameworks, clear acceptance criteria, creating feedback loops that catch the failures before they reach production, and also when they're in production as well. And I think for a long time it came down to sort of authority, the authoring of this. And it's not about writing code anymore. That's transformed to everything that sits around the code now to have the final say on whether that code is trustworthy. I mean, we keep using this word trust, don't we? But I think that's 100% right. Yeah.
Yeah. And with trust comes confidence. And we're coming back to that whole, can we put this release out? What do we need we need confidence, right? We need to trust that it's doing what it needs to do, and therefore, et cetera. So
we've even extended that now, Stu, because it's not just putting it out, it's keeping it out.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely. Yeah, absolutely. So it's there's just different layers that we're starting to build up on here, aren't there?
Yeah. I think that segues nicely into the third one, actually, which is that whole point around observability and testability.
Yes.
Test architecture, instrumenting everything for observability. You need to see what's happening inside you can't see what's inside the black box, but you can see what's around it to govern sort of what it's doing and check that what it's doing is right. That testability becomes paramount. You can't test every output. The maintenance shifts to some extent from fixing bugs, because there's maybe not a bug per se, to tuning behavior, updating guardrails, actually on guardrails, on that point we mentioned earlier about it being like a junior employee there. One enormous anti-pattern that people are starting to see is that what you cannot do is defer the decision-making policy to an LLM when it comes to anything around what tools it can use or what it's able to do and what it's not able to do. That has to be set outside of that. That has to be set still, in my mind, by a human that sits down and says, right, what can this thing not do? Let's get that down and let's embed that in a set of guardrails so you keep it on the track.
Yeah, and I just want to pick up on the observability side of it a little bit, because obviously that's, when we talk about like shifting left and then shifting right, and observability plays a massive part in that shift right piece around, observing production. There's so many tools out there now that are also using AI to do the observability. So you're coming back to that whole Claude writing its own code, you've got tools out there that will test, from an AI perspective, and then you've got tools that will do and it's just like, it's mind blowing to me that, like, where do you start? Where does the separation, need to be created to ensure that, again, the outcomes that we're trying to achieve are giving us confidence, are valid, and it comes back to testing, right? It comes back to that.
In all these things, who watches the watcher as these things become more pervasive and as they step up through the layers, if you like. We're already starting to see tools in terms of code generation, which won't just generate the code. They will, test the code. They will manage the code. They will have these different personas of every role within the software delivery lifecycle. In theory, yes, you can just hit the button and say, build me a website that does this. But that's downright dangerous. There has to be an awful. You're just creating this. At least you're creating this enormous attack surface for everybody to kind of to be able to go at. There has to be still human in the loop, architecting this stuff and actually putting those constraints around it and really defining the boundaries of what can and can't be done by this thing.
Yeah, and just to build on that, the human in the loop phrase and term is something that gets used a lot at the moment. To help people remember, you need to keep a human, guess what, in the loop, right? Makes sense. How I try and describe it to people is human oversight. So it shouldn't be the AI that's dictating to you what it's doing and this, that, and the other. Human oversight is needed to guide the AI to do the things it needs to do to get to the outcomes that we want to achieve. So that doesn't really go away, but it's evolving in terms of, the need, but it's becoming more and more and more important that you have that human oversight. So we may have done a little bit of like pair programming, pair testing, where you've got somebody else sort of dipping in and checking what you're doing. But now it's kind of like I feel that it's a much greater need because everything's generated so quickly, code's generated. Having a human oversight is even more important.
Human oversight, and that for me, I think, is one of the core skills, which is going to be far more prevalent. To some extent, everybody's a manager now. When you're running these things, irrespective of how junior you are, it used to be a while where you'd cut your teeth in a role, you'd spend a few years learning the ropes before you led a team of people, for example, and sort of got that and had to build those skills around delegation, around monitoring, around evaluation, and everything else. Now we're expecting juniors to do that very, very early on, and dare I say it, maybe your traditional standard sort of software developer isn't necessarily the world's best manager either. So those are a set of skills that need to be learned. But that oversight and that managing the orchestration of agents doing tasks and doing things, but ultimately, the agent can't be accountable. If you work in an environment where you need to be audited, you can't turn around and say, well, that decision, who made that? Well, GPT-5 did. We used the best model we could afford. It was great. It's got trillions of parameters.
Yeah, just there'll be a new thing. Just blame Claude.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and you can be damn sure that all the T's and C's created by these organisations, there are things very clearly stating that yes, any decisions you make is ultimately the human making them. Yes, and they are accountable and responsible for those decisions, not the machine itself. And that's a new world for us. That's something that needs to be thought about. But I often feel that test teams are also in the middle of this. They are the ones orchestrating the work across lots of different organisations and herding the cats and pulling it all together. Into that kind of cohesive whole. And I think those are really useful skills. And I think, coming back to the testing points, so much of what we've done in terms of test frameworks, automated test frameworks, which are able to run with, to run over this and actually see where the problems lie. Regression testing, that's absolutely essential in this stuff now. You need to have those golden data sets, those golden tests that you can run through this thing as a baseline to check that it's working. And that's no longer optional. If you don't do that, then you don't have a product. What you have is a flaky pilot, which is going to fail as soon as you sort of drop it into the real world and try to make it do anything in real life.
Yeah, and I think that's, for me, I talk a lot about like the continuous quality, how we build quality in as we go, and often when excuse me, when we look at that, immediately we look at sort of the more techie side of things, and what tools can we use, and how what automation do we run, and stuff like that. But for me, a lot of this comes back to just the core fundamentals of testing. Right, like you say, making sure you're doing the right testing at the right time throughout the entire sort of software life cycle. And yes, you can use different tools and you can throw in automation, but you need to know what you need to know, or what you need to do at each of those different points. And that's for me where continuous quality starts building in. And I know you touch on that as well in the article that you wrote, which by the way, everybody, we're going to link to. It's up on the 1010 website. We'll link to that so you can read it. But for me, it's all about feedback loops and understanding those feedback loops.
Understanding them, and I think if we kind of bring this to opportunities, I guess, we talked at the beginning around how we felt that people with a testing background are maybe further ahead than they think. I think they are further ahead. If you think about what we've got here, and Karpathy, when he talks about that bewildering new programmable layer, that's not new for testers. Eliminating ambiguity in specifications. Do that, tick the box. Designing verification mechanisms for systems you can't expect. Black box testing, building observability into opaque systems, test instrumentation, creating evaluation harnesses and regression suites, test automation, classifying failure modes and not doing root cause analysis, debugging and triage, monitoring drift and continuous quality. That's production testing. That's what's running there. We've been doing this a while. But I think one thing that's really interesting, I'd like your view on this, Stu, is that it often feels that over the years, you've got the business, you've got the test function, you've got the dev function, and everybody's coming together, and it's supposed to all be very nice and friendly. But there's still often been this friction, if you like, between the developers saying, "Well, I build it, you guys test it," and the business, saying, "Well, those guys are building it, you're testing it." Have you ever tried explaining testing to a CFO, or trying to trying to get some money out of them for it? It's really hard. It's kind of when they say, "What, you mean this thing that we've paid for already a fortune? You're now telling me that I need to spend a load more money making sure it works?" It's like, well, surely it works. I've just paid all this money for it. That's a hard conversation. It's a very hard conversation. It's very hard to justify. But because that automation of testing and everything else isn't optional anymore, it's baked into it. You have to do this in order to keep a system running.
Yeah.
But your CFO, they're still not going to understand that. But what they will understand, and what drives a CFO, is kind of how do they reduce cost without reducing risk. So you're running these systems, you've got these agents, you're running these LLMs. Those LLMs, unless you're running them locally, cost a lot of money. There's a monthly cost associated with that, and that can be really significant. That can be massive, depending on how many of those agents you're using in parallel, how long you're running them for, what type of agent you're using, the complexity and everything else. That is a material costs.
It is.
Which CFOs will very much have an eye on. If you've built this system which allows you to be able to confidently say, well, yes, this model works. Yeah, this model works well enough for us to go forward into production with it. New models come out all the time. New models are often cheaper, able to do the same thing. That becomes a very easy conversation with the CFO at that point. It's a case of, well, we've built something that allows us to take these models and turn them into a commodity thing. You can swap them out at will. Yeah. So you can go to a cheaper model, you can plug it in there, and that will save you thousands and thousands of pounds. That suddenly turns the conversation from one of, oh, well, we're a cost and we don't quite know what those guys do in the eyes of the CFO, to suddenly, wow, these guys are my best friends.
Yeah.
Month on month, they are saving me costs, because every month something new comes out. They're able to tell me whether it works as well as the old one did, and we'll swap it out and we'll save a fortune. That's a higher level conversation within the business. That's the function enabling something that often those business leaders consider far more important.
Yeah, it is, and we've always had that challenge, right? We've always had to justify the spend on quality, right? And not just testing, but quality as as an overlying thing. I think for me, when throughout my career, obviously as I've learned more and had these types of conversations over the years, and tried to get budget for teams and all this kind of stuff, things start I start breaking things down to obviously the risk side of things. Risk is always going to be your key driver. How do we mitigate risk? And sometimes you have to spend more money to mitigate risk, but is that a long-term solution or is there a better solution? And these are the things you need to consider. So in this instance, if we're able to swap new models out, that we have confidence in and they cut costs, great, right? But the focus there should be risk. The other thing that I find a lot is we talk a lot about efficiency. So what efficiency gains does this give us? Right. So being able to swap these models out quickly and then have confidence makes us more efficient. But we don't talk a lot about effectiveness. Does it make us more effective, or what can make us more effective? And some of those things are outside the tools we use. Some of those things are actually the broader system that we're working within, and that could be how we talk to each other, how we communicate, how we collaborate, how and things that are we having conversations at the right time? And for me, I think that's where we need to ensure that we're doing that more and more and more in this fast-paced world where, like you say, these things are starting to really drive different types of behaviors and different thinking and that kind of thing. And I think that those conversations with the CFOs around money and spend, we need to come at them with more a wider viewpoint rather than we need to do some testing. So I think that's where our mindsets need to shift a little bit more.
100%. But I think there's many CFOs who will be very happy to welcome a conversation with a tech team where they're not just coming to them cap in hand asking for more money, and they actually have a way of saving them money as well.
Exactly.
Being able to bring that home. And I think in terms of the points around the conversations as well, I firmly believe that as we converge on these new ways of working, using LLMs within the software and systems that we create, using LLMs to be able to do more of the work around the creation and testing of those software and systems, that I think a lot of the boundaries, the traditional boundaries between kind of dev and test, I think are going to disappear more than ever. And I think there's a slightly awkward conversation for the devs at some point where their value has always been, well, we create the product and you need to be a dev to create the product. So we are inherently valuable because that is what we're able to do. And these guys come along and they kind of verify the product. What happens when you're in a scenario where the cost of building is actually reduces significantly? And not just the cost of it, but the speed of it, to your point around efficiency. That becomes a very interesting sort of power dynamic between those two, where the constraint isn't actually what can you build it, and how quickly can you build it, but actually, can you confirm that this thing that has been built very quickly, that this magic built by this magic box, how can you confirm that this will work and it will continue working? That verifying role is then more valuable than the builder, sort of in the future world.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's a very interesting one in terms of you got that the builder sort of creates that sort of there's a phrase the builder creates the illusion of intelligence, the verifier defines the boundaries of reality, and you can't go live with that irrespective of how good you think it is without somebody there defining what it can do and what it can't do. And I think that's going to be very interesting going forward in terms of teams and makeups and conversations that happen between teams.
Yeah, I definitely think so, and I think a lot of times, if we were to look at, for example, when automation started coming into play, and it was all about the tools, it was all about the new skills, and now there's a sort of, if you take AI out of the equation, there's teams that are focusing on doing automation first type approaches, and they're struggling, but they're like, well, we know that we've got the skills, we've got the tools. Yeah, the problem is there's a disconnect in your general sort of ways of working, or those kind of things. And to your point, with code becoming more easier to write, compile, deploy, all that kind of stuff. The conversations then need to be making sure that, have we built the right, or have we built the right thing, but regardless of how we're doing it, and having these ways to actually bring confidence, and have those feedback loops as we talked about earlier and stuff like that. So I just think it's just going to become more and more prominent to double down on those sorts of things. And I did an episode recently where we were talking about automation first, and actually teams dive into that too soon before they actually look at sort of their more general process and go, actually, it's not the automation that's the problem. It's not this part of the testing that's the problem. It's everything that leads up to that.
Yeah.
And I can see that happening more and more and more.
And I think there's an interesting parallel there. One of the anti-patterns in test automation is that people think, more tests are better, right? I can write these things quickly, so I'll span it out. The view that the more tests you create, every test you write, you're accruing technical debt.
Yeah.
Less is more. You want a smaller number of clearly defined tests which are well thought through, that will do what they need to do with the minimum number of tests. And I think there's a bit of a danger there with AI as well, because it is so easy to generate code, and it's so easy to generate really crap code.
Yes.
And there's a whole other section around technical debt and how this stuff is
exactly
there. Yes, it may work, but in actual fact, is it maintainable? Can it be taken forward properly? So there's all that going on. But I think one of the big shifts as well is that when you think about how we develop products and what we do, the constraint has always been execution. It's always been how do we make sure that we decide what it is we're going to do before we do the thing? Because doing the thing takes time, it takes people, expensive people, skilled people, and we don't want to get that wrong. So we want to preserve that and secure it as much as we can. So we'll have people in rooms working out what it is we need to do up front, considering which of these three options we're going to go for, and which one we're actually going to put through and build and run with. Now, that if you then, where execution isn't constrained, and you can actually just develop all three at once very quickly, and then get them out there into the hands of the users, and then let them look at it and let them decide which one they like. That's going to really change the dynamics of how people work together and how teams work together. And I think the keys to the kingdom, belong to organizations that sort of embrace that and recognize that these things are fallible, but there is a huge opportunity to be able to use them, but to be able to herd the cats and actually use them effectively and use them well and use them within constraints in parallel all the time, to be able to drive it forward, but without derailing it. That's the hard part. It feels a little bit like it's you're on a runaway steam train, frankly, and you're trying to keep the wheels on that whilst it's going, and that's hard. But I think that's where the potential lies.
Yeah, absolutely. And those companies that still, and probably even more so, invest in the software testing and quality engineering side of their tech capabilities to the points that are being made. This doesn't go away. It magnifies what you need to do from a testing perspective, and actually utilizing those skills to validate what is being built and at speed and stuff like that. And doesn't mean that it's the testing has to take longer. We got to get smarter at how we do it and learn new ways, but the skills are there in the teams to do that already. And Ash, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm just thinking, like, if there was three maybe key insights or three key points that you would leave the audience with, because we've covered a lot today. Have you got three key areas?
Oh, that's always a hard one, isn't it?
It is. I'll put you on the spot.
So I guess the first one is, that point that you're actually not behind, and don't be worried. And all that worry about, oh God, I need to get up to speed on this, I need to upskill on this. There are new things all the time, but to some extent, some of the skills that you've built already are incredibly valuable and will become more valuable. So to some extent, you're not behind. Everybody's just catching up to your world.
Yeah, I love that.
So I'd say that's the first one. The second point is that point I was making about the CFO. You now hold sort of strategic power. By being able to swap out models as a result of the good work that's been done by the test teams, to be able to know that you can do that with confidence, that you have those firm foundations in place. You're the gatekeeper of things like vendor independence.
Yes.
If you want to avoid vendor lock-in, the LLM just becomes a commodity as soon as you got that in place. That will become very powerful, very important, because you're never quite sure what they're going to do behind the scenes, what they're going to do with the prices. As soon as you become really reliant on it, the first one's always free, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what does that then mean? And if you're able to just say, we can use whatever the hell LLM we want at whatever level, and we will know with confidence whether it's able to do the job we need it to do. That's really powerful. And I think the third one, that point I made before, that we're moving into a space now where the verifier is more valuable than the builder. If code can be written by LLMs and governed by people, the verifiers, the QA engineers, they're almost the sort of the guardians of reality, if you like, in that sort of increasingly sort of synthetic world. And I think that's a really, really important point. I'd say that's the main one.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's so, for everybody that's listening, it is a scary time, right? We've been through these things on so many different occasions over the years. It's also what I love about our industry and what we do in the quality engineering and software testing space is that nothing stands still. We're always having to adapt. We're always having to prove the value that we add and stuff like that. And I think through this conversation, Ash, one of the things that's standing out is this is starting to become more of a natural statement of, well, testing is actually becoming more prominent. It's more sort of the urgency and the need to have good, skilled, qualified testers in your team is more important now than it's ever been before. So anybody out there thinking, we can replace all our testers because the AI is going to do it, or we'll get this tool. And I will ask you just to take a moment and think again. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to share an opinion, but just take a serious think about, the message that Ash has shared in the conversation that we've had here in terms of the need and stuff like that. And as I say, Ash, this has been great. And I think, anybody that wants to read your article, as I say, it's up on the 1010 website. We'll share the link is shared in the show notes as well. But before we close the show, is there any? Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think the ultimate thing is that, as you said, you think you're behind, you're really not. And that fact, just keep in mind that the skills that you've been building over these years that you thought were all just about this particular area of the business are now the skills that everybody else desperately needs to learn. And they're at the bottom of that learning curve, scrambling, trying to get their heads around how you work with uncertainty and everything else. And just keep that in mind when you feel overwhelmed, when you think, oh my God, there's so much stuff out there. I just can't keep on top of it. And you can't. You're only human. There is so much out there that it's impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and everybody's going to have imposter syndrome. It's just the nature of what we do and the world we're living in right now. There's always going to be something new to learn. Don't put too much pressure on yourselves because it can become overwhelming. And I think, what we're doing through the Academy at 1010 is great because we're setting people up for success, but we're also teaching them the fundamentals of testing as well. We're not just teaching them prompt engineering and how to do great prompts and all that sort of stuff. They are getting that foundational knowledge, which is something that I get concerned about more broadly when, you have companies that are investing in grads and teaching them sort of the fundamentals of AI and prompt engineering, but they don't have the fundamentals and understanding of software testing. So again, thank you so much, Ash. It's been brilliant to have you on, and hopefully everybody that's been listening has breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe just be like, as we say, go away, have a read of the tweet, go away and have a read of Ash's article. If you'd like to get in touch with Ash, are people okay to reach out to you, Ash, if they want to have a chat?
Just LinkedIn's probably the easiest way. Just connect with me, and we'll go from there.
And if you're interested in any of the services that 1010 offer, then again, you can get in touch and always happy to help from that perspective. So that's it for another episode of the Quality Talks podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and most importantly, I'm going to say it, subscribe, because we need all the subscribers I can get. And yeah, be sure to join us on another episode of the Quality Talks podcast. Bye-bye.